Hi, welcome to Cloud Cover. My name is Ryan Dunn.
And I'm Steve Marks. Cloud Cover is our new show for developers on Channel 9 that's going to cover the Microsoft Cloud.
That's right. You can think of the Microsoft Cloud as what we've announced at PDC being SQL Azure, Windows Azure, and the App Fabric. This show is going to be taking a look and kind of keeping an eye on what's new and what's happening.
Every week we're going to cover news in the cloud, we're going to talk about new features as they come online, and we're going to give you tips and guidance on how to make the best use of the Windows Azure platform. If you want to interact with the show, you can go on Twitter and send a message to @CloudCoverShow. Feel free to drop us some hints about cool stuff you've seen or things you'd like to see us cover on the show.
That's great. In this show today, we're actually going to be covering the Service Management API, and we're going to be talking about some of the cool things that you can do in terms of getting started and how to really dip your foot first into the waters in Windows Azure.
But before that, let's cover the news. There's some big news actually just today from the SQL Azure team.
That's right. The System Update 1 has been released from the SQL Azure team. It includes some new functionality I think most developers will find very interesting. Specifically, there's some new DMVs, or dynamic management views, that allows us to look into things like the running transactions or the number of connections within the service, so just more management capability in there. Additionally, we have a way now to move between editions. So previously, if you had a 1 gigabyte database, you were kind of stuck there. You didn't have a way to upgrade to the 10 gigabyte version. Now that's just a simple modify command. A few other things as well. We've increased the idle timeout. So we went from, I believe, 30 minutes to now 5 minutes, or excuse me, 5 minutes to now 30 minutes. And then we've also kind of enhanced that diagnostic capability of looking at long-running transactions. So now you're probably not going to get cut off as regularly if you have some sort of query or other long-running transaction in the database that previously might have been cut off.
Cool. What else is new? So Windows Azure Drives was released. So this is the news from the Windows Azure team, also on the storage front. So Windows Azure Drives, for people who don't know and didn't hear the announcement at PDC, this is basically the idea of taking a virtual hard drive, storing it in blob storage, but then being able to mount it in Windows Azure as a regular NTFS drive. So after you mount it, you have a drive letter, say X:, and you can just do normal NTFS operations on it. So it's very cool to see that out. That is out in beta today, and so you can preview it for free for now.
That's great. Other news, we have an updated version of myazure-storage.com. So myazure-storage.com is a simple way for you to play around with the blob storage. So you're talking about Cloud Drive, right? Well, there's also a lot of other things within storage that you can do, and My Azure Storage makes that simple. So you can go out there, play with your tables, blobs, and queues, and do interesting things like create those shared access signatures. In addition, there's another great tool that we've run across, and it's called Cloud Explorer. Cloud Explorer actually is produced by a company called Clumsy Leaf. It's a rich client, so it sits on your desktop, and it does all those same things that myazure-storage.com does, but since it's a rich client, it can do things like drag and drop as well. Very cool tool.
Cool. There's another tool that I just heard about on Twitter. I just saw some people talking about this. It's called Hedgehog Dev Azure Cloud Application Monitor. And what it does is it takes all the diagnostics data that's coming from your Windows Azure application. So it takes the logs, the performance counters, anything else that you've got. It pulls it down locally and then shows it to you in this nice graphical form. So it's a pretty good way to sort of keep an eye on a running application and see how things are doing, see if your CPU usage is spiking or things like that. This is something a lot of people ask about, so that's a tool that's available on Codeplex today. Pretty cool for you to check that out. There's something else that I saw about just the architecture of an application. I just thought this was a pretty cool blog post. This is over at Mohammed's site at moslem.blogspot.com. Mohammed has put together a nice application called Azure Reader, and it's a feed reader and aggregator that's built on Windows Azure. It makes use of Windows Azure, a web role, and 2 different worker roles. It also uses SQL Azure Database as the back-end storage. And he's put together this nice blog post that just walks through how the data is formed, what the different roles do, and how they interact. And he's even got some code snippets of some of the things that he's doing. So for those of you who haven't built something yet or are looking to see what kinds of architectures are available on Windows Azure, I think this is a really nice blog post to help get you going.
That's great. The last piece of news actually is we have a new update to the Windows Azure Service Management commandlets. These are some PowerShell commandlets that use the Service Management API and allows you to automate the deployment of a lot of your running services and storage services out in Windows Azure. Speaking of service management, this seems like a good segue to talk about our feature today, which is in fact service management.
Yeah, so service management. So I'm not sure if everyone has seen service management APIs already. They've been out for many months. They came out, I guess, last summer.
Right.
And they basically let you do programmatically all the things that you would do in the Windows Azure Developer Portal. So where you would go and you would deploy something new, or you would swap your staging application with the production deployment, or maybe you would scale your application, change configuration settings. All of that is available through an API. It's a REST-based API for service management. The two things that you can't do with the service management API are that you can't create a new service. So you can't create stevescoolapp.cloudapp.net, and you also can't create a new storage account like stevescoolstorage.blob.core.windows.net.
I think I have those names already.
You've grabbed those ones? All right, so I couldn't do that anyway. But you certainly can from the Service Management API, but that's it. So once you've created those things, you can deploy bits, you can change the keys on your storage account, you can do all the other things that you would be able to do through the portal programmatically. This is really cool because it means that you can automate a lot of tasks. If you're scripting deployments, or you want to take your build process and have the last step of the build process be actually deploying to the cloud, you can do that. You can also build all sorts of cool custom tools like dashboards for monitoring your application, or for doing deployment tasks in your own UI. So Ryan has the service management commandlets, which are those PowerShell commandlets that we talked about, and he's going to show us something cool, just basic how to use those commandlets.
Sure. And in addition, if you're not comfortable with PowerShell, we actually do have a sample out on the Windows Azure code samples out on Code Gallery. It's called CS Manage. It's just a simple exe that you pass in some parameters, and it does pretty much everything. In fact, it does all of the API surface, obviously. The advantage of using something like PowerShell is you have a full scripting language, a very rich scripting language. So you can do very complicated or detailed deployment processes with lots of branching and ifs and thens, and it really takes it to the next level in terms of being able to control the automation of your services. So what I wanted to show you here is actually these Windows Azure Service Management commandlets. I downloaded them off of Code Gallery. We have them up at WAC Azure Commandlets from the Code Gallery URI. And you can see here from the screenshot that there's actually quite a few commandlets in here. I'm not going to be able to demo all of these, obviously, but I'm going to take a look at a few of the more commonly used ones. To do this, I'm going to bring up some scripts that I've previously written, and the reason I'm doing this is because I tend to make a lot of mistakes when I type, so it's probably easier if I just have it on screen to begin with. The important thing for the management APIs is there's really two pieces of information that start the whole process. And that's what certificate you're going to use, and additionally what we call your subscription ID, which you find out on the portal under the Account tab. Well, with those two pieces of information, we can actually pull all the rest of the information. So we can get things like your hosted services, we can get things like your storage account, and then we can perform all the operations on those.
For people who haven't used the service management API yet, that certificate that we're going to be using in here, this is just a certificate that you create yourself, and then you go to the Windows Azure Developer Portal and put that certificate in there. You basically just upload the certificate and say, this is what I'm going to use when I make the calls. And this is how you authenticate all your access with the Service Management API.
And a little later in the show, when we get to the tip about how to get started, we're actually going to point to a really good resource that has the exact steps and command lines that you need to do to associate that certificate. It's not scary at all. It takes probably 5 minutes at the most to get this done. Yeah. And once it's done, that's all you have to do. It's a one-time thing. From that point on, you can manage your account. So what I have here again is I have just some prerequisite information. In this case, I have a reference to the certificate. You'll see that I'm just querying my local certificate store, in this case the My Store, and here's the thumbprint of my certificate. I pulled this particular sub-ID off of the portal again, and then I have a service name that I want to manage called My Azure Storage Dev. Now I can query this, or if I happen to know it up front, I'm just going to put it in a parameter. And finally, as part of the training kit, which we'll get to a little bit later, we have some sample packages that you can actually deploy. So you don't have to go out there and create your own service or even a Hello World app. We have some sample ones that are ready to go. You just take them and go ahead and deploy those. Now, You'll see a lot of the patterns here begin with this get hosted service dash subscription ID sub certificate. You'll see this as a common parameter in all these things. And if we take that and we just highlight this particular step, and I've got to be careful here because I have a running instance. I don't actually want to suspend it, but I'm going to go right to this part right here, and I'm going to say get hosted service and then get the deployment production. When I do that and I just hit F8 to run that, it's going to go out and it's actually going to grab that service, that My Azure Storage Dev. It's going to pull it down and it's going to grab specifically the production environment. You'll see in the output down below what we have here is the configuration. I'll make this a little bit bigger so you can see. We have the configuration pulled back from the portal. So this is the same thing that you would see if you go to the portal. It gives me the status, which is in fact running. Gives me this base 64 configuration, which I know is a little bit ugly. So what we did was we wrapped that into this role configuration. And inside the role configuration, we actually have all the information in a nice dictionary format, key value pairs, so you can go in there and actually update that as well. And then we also have things like the label, the OS version in here, and of course our role instance list. So that tells us how many instances we have running. Now, if I take this command that we just ran, I'm just going to do this from the command line now. Take that command and bring it up here. You'll see, well, let's just do it manually here. Get hosted service. I need to provide the subscription ID.
Autocomplete is one of the nice things that you get out of using the PowerShell commandlets, because
exactly
having to figure out the exact syntax and is not always easy. So autocomplete comes in handy.
I'm going to go ahead and grab this production URI again. And I'm going to save this to a local variable actually. So I'm going to just, it doesn't matter what it's called. I'm just going to grab this and actually save this into a local variable. So now when I do that, I can actually reference foo, and in this case, I can get all of the properties on there. So that role instance list, for instance, I can pull up, and when I do that, you'll see here's all the role instances, and you'll see the status. All of these happen to be in the ready status, which means they're up, listening, they're responding to the load balancer. And if I had for instance, more roles, you would see the role names changing here, and you see the different instance names. So it gives you at a glance really what's happening. In fact, a little more detail than actually is currently exposed on the portal today. This information is out there like this. Some of the other things that we can do in here as part of this is not only obviously look at the status, but we can do things like, for instance, shut down a service. So in this case, what I'm doing is I'm piping the production deployment to that operation status, set operation status. I'm passing it the suspended. What that's going to do is it's going to go out, and it's just like clicking that big suspend button on the portal. I'll actually turn off the instances. And then if I were to execute this command, which again, it just builds from the previous one, where I get the production environment, I say remove deployment. Bam, that's gone. It's going to blow it away. And you're going to have an empty environment at that case.
So this is like pressing delete, right, in the
exactly.
portal.
It is exactly delete on the portal. Now the next one is actually a new deployment. So I get the service and I pipe a new deployment, and the only thing I'm passing to it is the package, the configuration, and a label. What it's going to do is if it gives me a file, if I have a file path, which I do in this case, it's going to upload it first into the storage account that's associated here. And then it's going to go ahead and start that deployment, or excuse me, put it into a deployed stage. What it won't do is start it. The next command is the opposite of the one you saw me in the suspended, which in this case is I'm going to set it to running. That's going to turn it on, and you'll see after 5-10 minutes, whatever it is, all your instances start up and become into the ready state. And finally, we can do more things, of course. We could do things like take the hosted services, and if I really wanted to see, for instance, all my running services, I can do much more sophisticated queries. Like in this case, I'm going to expand the role instance list. I'm going to group by role name. This is some of the power of PowerShell being able to do that. I can run this, actually have all that happen for me. I can also do things like go out and from my storage account here, I'm going to grab the key. This is the primary key for my storage account called deploy. That's the storage account name. I'm going to grab that. I'm going to get the deployment ID from this running service that I have out here in production. And then I'm going to define a couple counters. In this case, I'm going to grab processor time, and I'm going to say a polling rate of 5 seconds. These commandlets actually allow us to go ahead and update the diagnostic information as well. So in this case, what I'm doing is from that storage account, I'm grabbing all the diagnostic aware roles, I'm piping that input into the commandlet that gets the instances within the role. So not only do I have the role, now I'm grabbing each instance of the role, and for each instance of the role, I'm grabbing the current diagnostic configuration for the performance counters. I'm pulling that back, and then I'm going to go in, I'm going to define a new performance counter. In this case, the one I declare here, which is the total CPU time with a pull rate of 5 seconds. I'm going to add that to the configuration that was previously there so I don't lose anything. I'm just going to add to it. And then for each one of those, I'm going to set the performance counter. All of this completely automated. So if you have a list of counters that you want or something like that, you can easily imagine that this is a big list of the counters you want. You can go out, hit a script, go run across all your instances, all your roles, set the information, and you know that your diagnostics has been configured. Now, this is just a kind of a hint of a few of the things you can do with this, but you can imagine that people can get very, very sophisticated with the power of the commandlets.
Yeah, that's pretty cool. I mean, I like that some of the things are easy to do, and in fact, some of the things are easier to do this way than any other way. Like increasing the instance count is the example I always like.
Yep.
That it's actually much easier to set through these PowerShell commandlets than pretty much any other way. Any other way has you editing a config file. This lets you do it from code.
That's right.
And that's I like that that's not that difficult. But what I like is that the harder things that you want to do, like, for example, looping over everything or aggregating some results or things, are also possible. So if you're willing to write a little bit of script, it's not that bad. And so this follows sort of, that age-old goal of making the easy things easy and the hard things possible. And so these commandlets are very nice. There is a lot in there.
There is, and there's some more example uses on the CodePlex page, but as you mentioned, here's that particular one you were talking about. So in this case, it follows that exact pattern we saw, which is we're going out, we're getting the production deployment from our hosted service, and then to scale, we simply set the deployment configuration. And isn't this great? We just do .instant count plus equals 1.
Yeah.
In this case, we just scaled one
cool.
instance. So very easy to do. Go ahead, go out to CodePlex or Code Gallery, excuse me, and download these commandlets. And then from there, you're off and running with the automation.
Yeah. Speaking of getting off and running, that brings us to today's tip, which is all about how to get started with Windows Azure. So.
Right.
Let's show everyone my absolute favorite way to install everything that you need for Windows Azure, which is using the web platform installer. And this is on Microsoft.com/web. Just click a couple buttons and you'll have the installer up.
Yep. You'll get this download it now link. And once you actually have that install, a very simple kind of click once installation, what we have is something that looks like this. So when you pull up the installer, it's going to give you a list of all the different tools that we have, the web platform applications you can install. Really nice way, by the way, if you wanted to install, for instance, DOSBlog or something like that. Single click install. What you need to do, though, is under the options, you have to go in and you have to actually make sure that the developer tools are checked. By default, the web platform installer is not going to hit people with a whole bunch of developer-focused tools if they're probably not going to be interested in this. However, if you check that, what you'll see is under the developer tools, you'll have the Visual Studio tools, expression tools, and you'll have things like, in this case, the Windows Azure Platform tools as well. So take a look and you can see here that I already have this particular thing installed. The one caveat to doing it this way, I think we should point out, and this works fantastic on Visual Studio 2008 SP1, for the RC release, which is currently out for Visual Studio 2010. However, and notice I said 2010, not 2010. I'm with the whole brevity thing.
All right.
Okay. Now that I've spent 10 minutes telling you this. Now, if you have the RC installed, basically, it's not going to detect it. So when you go ahead and install these tools, the first thing it's going to do is it's going to say, let me configure the machine, make sure you have IIS set up, make sure I have the Windows Activation Service, all those things that you need to get done, all the dependencies. But it's also going to say, hey, you don't have Visual Studio installed. Why don't I install the free Visual Studio 2008 Express edition of the web tool? You don't have to install that. You can actually, before it does anything, it gives you a checklist of the things that you have on your machine. You can uncheck that if you don't want, or just install it. It's a great tool as well. But either way, it's going to set up your machine correctly, and you'll get the SDK and tools installed.
Yeah, the thing that's really nice about using the web platform installer is all those dependencies. Well, do I have Visual Studio already? Do I need SQL Express? Do I have IIS configured properly with
Right.
ASP.NET? Is WCF activation going to work and things?
Right.
You don't have to worry about that with the web platform installer because it checks the machine and it installs anything that you don't already have and anything that you need. And as you said, it gives you a list of everything it's going to do before it does anything. So don't worry that this is going to do something you don't like to your machine. It's a fantastic tool, the web platform installer, not just for Windows Azure, but for installing a lot of things. So once you've got the web platform installer and you've installed the Visual Studio tools and the SDK for Windows Azure, a lot of people are wondering, what do I do next? What's the first thing I can do? How do I get started building something? And for that, we have something that Ryan, your team, has put together called the Windows Azure Platform Training Kit.
Correct. So we kind of talked about a little bit earlier. You saw me deploy a package, or at least have the path to a package. From the Platform Training Kit, we have a whole bunch of ways here for you to learn and get started with the platform. So these include things like very popular hands-on labs, introduction to Windows Azure, SQL Azure, the App Fabric, the Access Control Service, you name it, it's in the lab. Additionally, we have things like how to migrate databases, or working with the new Microsoft codename Dallas service. Things that people are very excited about and they want to get involved with. This is just the easiest way to get started because it's a step-by-step guide on how to get started, how to configure Visual Studio, any setup steps at the portals or anything that you have to do first. You'll find it all here. In addition to the labs, we have things like the videos and presentations, and we have some full-featured demos in here as well that you can pull out and play with. So if you're just interested in the code, you don't want to follow the lab, we always have the complete solution for you. You can just pull it apart. I know some people like that manner better. Hey, I don't want to build it from ground zero, just give me the whole working thing. And we support that. We have that in there as well. I think that's really the easiest way to get started.
Yeah, it's fantastic. There's a lot in there. I mean, the fact that there are videos and presentations, you know, as well as just code that you can go pick apart, or these labs that take you step by step, you know, with screenshots and with code snippets and just tell you, you know, how to build the whole thing. Very cool. And the fact that those demos are there means after you've downloaded the training kit, you can just open one up and press F5 and go deploy, and you know, you don't have to do anything. You can get instant gratification, which is, you know, what we're all about with the cloud.
Yeah, and it's important to point out, if you have this training kit installed locally as well, almost all of these labs work with the local dev fabric, which I think is a great tool to get started as well.
Yeah.
You don't have to deploy to the cloud. If you just want to simulate and see how it's going to work in the cloud, you want to see the reaction of multiple instances or load balancing or how these APIs interact, the local dev fabric is a fantastic tool. So you can literally be on a plane, no connection to the internet whatsoever, be playing with these labs and figure out how everything's going to work.
I write most of my demos for conferences on the plane on the way there, so
Dev Fabric's perfect for it.
that's the way to do it. All right, well, I think that's going to do it for our first show. Thanks for joining us for the Cloud Cover Show. Remember that if you want to interact with us, the best way to do that is hop on Twitter and send a message to @CloudCoverShow. And until next time, I'm Steve Marks.
I'm Ryan Dunn. Make sure you get started with Windows Azure today. Thanks.
Thanks.